So the International Longevity Centre, based in the UK, bit of a mouthful, has come out and said that they think the state pension age in the UK should be raised to 71 by 2050. Now, I don't normally comment on these kind of topics on this channel because it can stray into the realms of politics, and this is purely a finance channel. But it seems to have gathered so much media attention that I thought it's worth discussing the finance side of it, since that impacts all of us here and it impacts our long-term planning and thinking. So in this video, I'm going to quickly summarise what the report covers, why it's recommending an increase in the state pension age, and what my thoughts are about it and how it impacts our finances. So I'll leave some links in the description below where you can see the blog post that triggered this, a link to the charities page that actually published this blog post, and a link to the government website where you can see that it's a registered charity. So what's triggered this report? Well, over the last 40 to 50 years in the UK, our ratio of people over the age of 65, so generally considered retired, and those at working age has been fairly stable at around 3 to 1 as the ratio. However, as we get into the 2030s, 2040s and 2050s, that ratio is supposed to shift dramatically, and we'll get more to the range of 2 working people for every 1 retired person. And obviously that's a huge burden on those that are working because they need to support not only themselves, but also those who can no longer work. And this change in ratio of over 65s to under 65s has been driven by a couple of different things. So firstly, life expectancies have increased massively over the last century, but that's also been coupled with a declining fertility rate. So in the UK, our fertility rate has been below 2.1, which is generally considered the replacement rate for quite some time now. And that's meant that our population demographic pyramid, which should normally look like, as the name suggests, a pyramid, with more people at the bottom and a smaller number of people at the top as you get older, becoming much more like an ordinary looking skyscraper where it's pretty similar across all age brackets. So that's left us in a position where, of the government's annual spending, pensions are actually the 3rd largest segment of that now, ahead of working age benefits and behind healthcare. And so obviously if we increase the number of people who receive that pension, that's only going to take up a larger share of our national spending, and therefore we either need to grow the amount that we can spend nationally, or we need to make cutbacks somewhere. So this report really sets the scene for that debate to happen. So just so we're all on the same level playing field to start the conversation, I'm just going to quickly recap what the state pension is and how it works. So everything that I talk about here is going to apply to what's known as the new state pension. So this is anyone who was born after about 1950, you would be in line to accumulate what's known as the new state pension. So the new state pension is paid out every 4 weeks. At the time of recording, it stands at just over £200 per week, which is around £10,600 per year. And so that's the full state pension. Now, to qualify for the state pension, you have to work or claim national insurance credits through your working career. And so once you reach 10 full years of that, you qualify for the state pension. And once you reach 35 years of national insurance contributions, you qualify for the full state pension. And so there's a sliding scale. So as the more national insurance qualifying years you accumulate, the higher the percentage of that £203 a week that you qualify for. And so every year the government increases the state pension. And that's currently been under a system that's known as the triple lock. And so the idea of the triple lock system is that pensions will increase in line with inflation or pay. And so the idea is that pensioners don't become worse off over time. Now you can claim your state pension from the age of 66, and that applies to both men and women. But if you were born after the 5th of April 1960, it will be 67 that you can claim your state pension. And so this report is then pushing that limit, saying that it should increase further. Just so you don't have to go and read the whole thing, although I will leave a link to it down in the description below, I'll just give you the quick overview of what the article actually says and why it wants to increase the state pension age. So the article doesn't explicitly say why 2050 is the target date to increase the state pension age to 71, but that generally seems to align with data that I've seen from the ONS about the ratio of workers to retirees by the 2040s and 50s being much higher than it is now. And so the stated aim of the article is to keep the ratio of pensioners to working age adults at the same ratio that it is now. The idea being that it seems to be relatively sustainable at the moment, but the further we push it, the less sustainable that ratio is likely to get. So if we keep it where we know it seems to be working, then that's good for the long term. So what's my take on this report? Do I agree with it? Do I disagree with it? Well, I actually think there's some things the report gets right. I do think that if we keep stretching the ratio of workers to retirees, that's not going to be good for the economy in general, because all of our economic output will go on to supporting retirees rather than trying to grow the pie for everyone. And this is a problem that's going to be faced by many countries in the Western world, where our demographics are shifting and shifting rapidly. Perhaps the one we're all looking at is Japan in the distance, which seems to be going through this demographic change about 20 years ahead of the rest of us. Now, I do think actual good strides have been made in the pensions area, especially since the introduction of auto-enrolment in 2012. So from 2012, if you work in the UK, are over the age of 22 and earn over £10,000 per annum, you should be auto-enrolled by your employer. Obviously, this doesn't apply to self-employed people. And that means you should automatically be putting some money aside into your own private pension. Now, private pensions are accessible before the state pension, and the idea being that if you have a private pension, it means that the state pension only needs to provide that bare bones necessities level of income for you, and everything else should be topped up by your own personal savings. So that means the number of people who have a pension in the UK has gone from about 50% to about 75% since auto-enrolment came in. That's obviously great news long term, but there's still a 25% shortfall there. But what I do think the report picks up on, which I actually consider the core issue here, is the healthy lifespans of people. So you may be familiar with the metric of expected life expectancy at birth. So that's the common one that's quoted. It generally means in your sort of mid-80s. So if you're born now, by your mid-80s, that would be your expected death age on average. Unfortunately, this varies wildly with socioeconomic background, but that's the average number. But health span is a slightly different measure. So health span looks at what percentage of your life you would remain healthy for. And again, unfortunately, it massively varies with your socio-economic background. But generally, by the time you reach your mid-60s, that would be the average end of your healthy lifespan. Unfortunately, after that age, you're more likely to need much more intensive care and support from family, friends, or the health service. And that actually means that from about the age of 65 onwards, you are a net receiver of services from the state, whereas generally from around 21 through to 65, you're a net giver in terms of tax receipts compared to what you consume. And so this is the balance that needs to be struck. So I've generally seen 3 different responses to this article. I want to just briefly touch on all of them before we discuss what that means for us. So the first response I've seen to this article is that generally the pension system should become means tested. And so the idea behind something being means tested is that if someone can afford without support from the state, then they should rely on their own savings. And so this could take the position of people with large amounts of wealth outside of, say, property, could be judged to be able to support themselves without the need for a state pension. And so therefore the state obviously has to pay a state pension to fewer people. Now that's generally in line with how the benefit system works anyway. There are thresholds of savings where if you're above that you can't receive the benefits, and if you're below that then you can receive benefits. Now whilst in concept this idea sounds great, there are a few things that just concern me about it slightly. The first thing that this concerns me is that it really disincentivizes people to save and invest. Because why would you save and invest and put that money away for the future if that means you'll receive fewer benefits in the future from the state? I could just take that money now and spend it now on experiences and things that I may be sacrificing to have a better income later in life. And I don't think that's a particularly healthy, sustainable model that we should be having in the UK. I think we should be encouraging some level of savings and investments. I obviously don't agree that we should be depriving ourselves now for the future, but there needs to be some level of prudency and planning ahead for the future. And I think having a means-tested system, depending on where the taper starts or where the cut-off starts, could be detrimental to that. Obviously, if the cut-off or taper was at a high enough level, I think it would be fine, because for the majority of people, they wouldn't hit that taper. It probably only really affects the super wealthy, who really just don't need the state pension anyway. The second response that I've seen to this article is focusing on fertility rates. So the main problem that this article is clearly pointing out is that we have a demographic problem in the UK, where we have an increasing number of older people in relation to the number of working age people in the country. The UK has a fertility below 2.1, so that means that the average woman will have less than 2.1 children, and that's generally considered the replacement rate. And we've been below that in the UK for quite a while now, with our population only really growing due to net migration into the UK. Now, I actually think the government is starting to put the baby steps in place for this. So free childcare hours are increasing as of the next tax year coming up, and I expect us to potentially move towards more pro-family policies, as we've seen in some Nordic countries. But as we've also seen from those Nordic countries, that isn't the silver bullet. Having these government policies in place that encourage families to be brought up and developed doesn't necessarily actually increase to an increase in the fertility rate. And the second problem we have with these policies is that the policies are introduced, but we don't actually see if those policies are working for many years after they're introduced. And by that point, as this article points out, we might have hit that crunch point where the demographics tip into an unsustainable point. And now the third response to the article is about health spans. So I've touched on them in the video already. And that's that whilst we have a lifespan, we also have a health span within that, when we're able to do things and work and be able to just physically enjoy life as we want. So unfortunately, health spans are significantly below lifespans. So if we could increase health spans, that not only increases the age that people might be willing to work just themselves at, but it also changes the amount of spending that we have as a country on healthcare. And remember, healthcare is an even larger expense than state pension in the UK. So if we reduce the amount of spending that we have in healthcare, it frees up money in the public finances to either cut taxes or to increase spending on infrastructure and other things that are shown to have good benefits to the society as a whole. Now, I don't think there's any silver bullets here. There's nothing that we're going to be able to do as a country and as a society which will solve everything overnight. I think it's going to have to be a slow and steady shift. And I think articles like this, whilst they're maybe not the most helpful in that they can be quite inflammatory and cause a lot of debate, they do focus the attention on things that are potentially going to be an issue in the future. And so how does that affect us in our long-term finances and planning? Well, for me, it doesn't really affect my position. I'm planning to build an investment portfolio anyway, and I'm documenting that here on this channel, because that puts everything in my control. Even if the system comes in and is means tested, yes, it will be a little bit annoying because there's money that I've got now that I've put away for long-term investing that I could have had to spend on a new car, a bigger house, whatever I wanted. But I still have that money. I don't lose that money. And so I can still have that financial clout behind me. Whereas if I wasn't investing, I'm purely reliant on the whims of policymakers in Westminster. So from that point of view, it doesn't really change my planning. Obviously, the state pension would be a great cherry on the top when I get to a retirement age. But for now, I'm almost working on the assumption that it doesn't exist, because that's the worst case scenario. Now, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic. I think it's quite a potentially divisive topic. I'd like the comments to remain quite finance related. I don't want them descending into political arguments, so I'll probably shut down comments if we get too far down that road. But I'd love to hear what your thoughts are, and if this has prompted you to think about your long-term pension savings, and if there's any other adjustments that you think you would need to make if state pension was to change from its current format. Now, if you liked this content, I'd really appreciate you to subscribe. It means that you'll be notified when I push out new videos, and hopefully it's content that you'll find informative and entertaining. And I'd also love to just interact with you in the comments as well, as we build a nice community around this YouTube channel. So I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye.